On October 7, 2014, GoPro was on top of the world. The company had just gone public. Their stock price hit $93 per share. They were valued at $13 billion. Their CEO, Nick Woodman, was the highest paid executive in the United States. He was making more money than the CEOs of Disney, Starbucks, and Microsoft. He was the surfing billionaire. His face was on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline read, "The Mad Billionaire." GoPro was not just a camera company. It was a media empire. It was a lifestyle brand. It was the coolest company in Silicon Valley. Every teenager wanted one for Christmas. Every skydiver, every surfer, and every skier was wearing one. But then the wave crashed. Today GoPro trades for less than $2. The company has lost 98% of its value. They have laid off thousands of employees. They went from being worth $13 billion to being worth less than $300 million. How did the coolest brand on earth become a penny stock? The answer is ironic. They built a product that was too good. They made a camera that was so durable, so tough, and so indestructible that nobody ever needed to buy a second one. They solved the problem of action photography so well that they put themselves out of business. This is the story of a company that conquered the world and then realized they had nowhere left to go. Before Nick Woodman was a billionaire, he was a failure. In the late 1990s, he started a dot-com company called Funbug. It was a marketing website that gave away cash prizes. He raised $3.9 million from investors, and he lost it all. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, Funbug went bankrupt. Nick Woodman was unemployed. He was depressed. He felt like he had let everyone down. So he did what any 26-year-old surfer would do. He went on a surf trip. He booked a flight to Australia and Indonesia. He wanted to clear his head and find his next big idea. While he was surfing in Indonesia, he noticed a problem. He wanted to take pictures of himself and his friends in the water, but he could not. Waterproof cameras were too expensive for a regular guy, and the cheap disposable cameras broke immediately or fell off his wrist. He tried to strap a Kodak camera to his wrist using rubber bands and a broken surfboard leash. It kept hitting him in the face. It was a disaster. That was the spark. He realized that surfers needed a camera that could survive the ocean and stay attached to their bodies. He came back to California with a mission. He moved back in with his parents. He worked 18-hour days. He sewed the first prototype straps himself using his mom's sewing machine. He called it GoPro because he wanted to help amateur surfers GoPro. Nick Woodman had no money left from his first failed startup. He needed capital, but he was terrified of taking money from investors again. He did not want to lose other people's money, so he bootstrapped it. On his trip to Indonesia, he and his girlfriend had bought thousands of shell and bead belts from a local market for $2 each. When they got back to California, they drove up and down the coast in his 1971 Volkswagen bus. They called the bus the Biscuit. They went to music festivals and surf competitions, selling these belts for $60 apiece. They sold thousands of them. With the profit from the belts and a $35,000 loan from his mother, he launched GoPro. But the first GoPro was not digital. It was a film camera. It was 2004. Digital cameras were still expensive and fragile. So Nick used a cheap 35mm film camera made in China. He bought the rights to it for a few dollars. He built a waterproof plastic shell around it. He added his custom wrist strap. He debuted it at a sports trade show in San Diego. He was nervous. He walked around the show floor wearing the camera on his wrist trying to look cool. It worked. A Japanese company ordered 100 cameras. Nick Woodman ran back to his booth and cheered. GoPro was in business. For the first few years, GoPro was a tiny niche company. They sold 2 surfers and race car drivers. They made about $350,000 in revenue. But in 2006, everything changed. YouTube was bought by Google. Video was taking over the internet. Nick Woodman realized that film was dead. People wanted to share videos online instantly. He made the pivot to digital. In 2007, he released the Digital Hero 3. It had a 3-megapixel sensor. It could shoot video with sound. It was still clunky. It used AAA batteries, but it was rugged. You could drop it off a cliff and it would keep recording. Then came the breakthrough, the wide-angle lens. Most cameras have a narrow view. If you hold them close to your face, you only see your nose. GoPro added a 170-degree wide-angle lens. Suddenly you could see the surfer, the board, and the wave all in one shot. It created a look, the GoPro look. It made the viewer feel like they were inside the action. This was not just a camera feature. It was a marketing revolution. GoPro did not need to pay for advertising. Their customers did it for them. Every time a skier jumped off a cliff wearing a GoPro, they posted the video on YouTube. Every time a surfer got barreled in Hawaii, they posted the video on Facebook. The title of the video always included "Shot on GoPro." It was the ultimate viral loop. The better the videos looked, the more cameras they sold. The more cameras they sold, the more videos appeared online. Nick Woodman leaned into this. He started sponsoring athletes. He gave free cameras to Kelly Slater, the greatest surfer of all time. He gave cameras to Shaun White, the snowboarder. He partnered with Red Bull. Suddenly GoPro was everywhere. It was on the helmets of soldiers. It was on the dashboards of rally cars. It was strapped to eagles flying over mountains. In 2010, the company revenue hit $64 million. By 2011, it doubled to $234 million. By 2012, it doubled again to $500 million. The growth was exponential. Foxconn, the company that makes the iPhone, invested $200 million for a nearly 9% stake. Nick Woodman was a star. He was charismatic, high energy, and always yelling about being stoked. He was the perfect mascot for the brand. In 2014, GoPro went public on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. It was chaos. Investors were fighting to get shares. The stock opened at $24 and shot up to nearly $100 within months. The company was valued at $13 billion. Nick Woodman fulfilled a promise he made to his college roommate Neil Dana. Years earlier, he promised to give Neil 10% of his shares if the company ever made it big. Nick wrote him a check for $229 million. It was a fairy tale. In 2014, GoPro sold nearly 4 million cameras. They generated $1.4 billion in revenue. They had 70% of the action camera market. They were a monopoly. Sony tried to compete and failed. Panasonic tried and failed. Nobody could touch the brand. But at the very moment they reached the summit, the ground started to crumble. They had hit the saturation wall. The problem with selling an indestructible camera is that it does not break. If you bought a GoPro Hero 3 in 2012, it still worked perfectly in 2015. Why would you buy a new one? The image quality was already good enough. 1080p video looks great on YouTube. Most people did not need 4K resolution. Sales started to plateau. Investors started asking questions. They asked, what is next? Is GoPro a one-product company? Nick Woodman tried to convince them that GoPro was a media company. He announced plans to launch a streaming service. He talked about GoPro becoming the next Disney. He spent millions hiring television executives. He produced original shows, but nobody watched them. People liked watching short clips of crashes and stunts on Instagram. They did not want to watch a 30-minute GoPro documentary on TV. The media strategy was a money pit. They were burning cash and getting no return. Meanwhile, the core business was shrinking. In the fourth quarter of 2015, revenue crashed by 31%. The stock began to freefall. It dropped from $90 to $30, then to $10. Nick Woodman needed a new hit product. He decided to enter the hottest market in tech, drones. In 2015, drones were exploding in popularity. A Chinese company called DJI was dominating the market with the Phantom drone. Nick Woodman looked at DJI and thought, we can do that better. GoPro users were already strapping cameras to drones. It seemed like a natural fit. They spent years developing a drone called Karma. It was sleek. It was foldable. It fit in a backpack. Nick Woodman hyped it up as the ultimate GoPro accessory. They launched Karma in late 2016. It was priced at $799. 1 week later, DJI launched the Mavic Pro. The Mavic was smaller, faster, had a better camera and better software, and it was cheaper. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that the Karma fell out of the sky, literally. A few weeks after launch, reports started coming in. Users were flying their Karma drones, and suddenly the power would cut out. The drones would crash into the ground like stones. It was a safety hazard. Imagine a heavy plastic drone falling from 400 feet onto a crowd of people. GoPro had to issue a total recall. They recalled all 2,500 units they had sold. They refunded everyone. They had to stop selling the drone entirely. It was a humiliation. They lost $100 million on the project. 2 years later, they exited the drone market completely. They admitted defeat to DJI. While the drone disaster was happening, they also messed up their core product. They released a new camera called the Hero for Session. It was a tiny black cube. It had no screen. It was cute, but it was priced at $399. That was the same price as their flagship camera, which had a screen and better battery life. Customers were confused. Why would I pay the same price for a smaller, worse camera? Nobody bought it. GoPro had to lower the price to $299. Still nobody bought it. Then they lowered it to $199. Finally, people started buying it, but by then GoPro was losing money on every unit. They had too much inventory. They had warehouses full of cameras nobody wanted. They had to take a charge of $57 million to write down the inventory. The stock dropped below $10. But the real villain in this story is not a drone or a cube. It is the iPhone. In 2016, Apple released the iPhone 7. It was water-resistant. Suddenly you could take your phone into the pool. You could take it to the beach. Samsung and Google followed with waterproof phones. The cameras on phones became incredible. They had stabilization. They had 4K video. They had slow motion. For 99% of people, the phone was good enough. You did not need a separate GoPro unless you were jumping out of a plane or surfing a giant wave. GoPro went from a mass-market product to a niche product. The soccer mom did not need a GoPro anymore. The tourists walking around Paris did not need a GoPro. Only the extreme athletes needed one. And there are not enough extreme athletes to support a $13 billion valuation. By 2018, GoPro was on life support. The stock was trading at $5. They had laid off 20% of their workforce. They shut down the media division. They shut down the drone division. Nick Woodman cut his salary to $1. He was sued by investors. There were rumors that the company would be sold to Xiaomi or Apple, but nobody bought them. They had to survive on their own. To their credit, they did survive. They refocused on the core customer. they introduced a subscription service. For $50 a year, you get unlimited cloud storage and discounts on cameras. This gave them the one thing they never had: recurring revenue. Today they have 2 million subscribers. It brings in $100 million a year in high-margin profit. It saved the company from bankruptcy, but the glory days are gone. The stock trades flat. The valuation is tiny. They are a zombie company. They exist, but they do not grow. The rise and fall of GoPro is a classic example of a hardware trap. Here are the 3 lessons from their collapse. Lesson 1. Durability is a bad business model. This is the sad truth of capitalism. If you make a product that lasts forever, you eventually run out of customers. GoPro built a camera that was too tough. The upgrade cycle was too long. Apple solves this by slowing down old phones and making new ones a status symbol. GoPro could not do that. An old GoPro looks just as cool as a new one. Without a reason to upgrade, revenue falls off a cliff. Lesson 2. Do not compete where you cannot win. GoPro tried to beat DJI at drones. DJI had thousands of engineers and owned their own factories. GoPro was a marketing company that outsourced manufacturing. They had no chance. They burned cash trying to fight a war they were destined to lose. Stick to your niche. Expand only where you have an unfair advantage. Lesson 3. Total addressable market is real. GoPro investors thought every human on Earth would buy a GoPro. They priced the stock like it was the next Facebook. But the reality was that GoPro is a niche product. Most people do not jump off cliffs. Most people sit on the couch. The market for action cameras has a ceiling. GoPro hit that ceiling in 2014 and never broke through it. They confused a fad with a trend. Nick Woodman created a category, defined a generation, and built a billion-dollar brand. But in the end, he learned the hardest lesson in hardware. It is easy to sell the first one. It is almost impossible to sell the second one.